Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. Enjoy your time by subscribe and like. Today's first story, The Strange Scholar Neighbor. My parents used to live in Seattle, in a small suburban community. They said it was filled with regular middle-class families. The community vibe was decent. Sometimes you'd hear arguments between new couples, but nothing too intense. It didn't get out of hand. However, tonight they finally told me why they moved all the way across the country to New York. Back then, Dad had a good relationship with the neighbor next door, but in their family, the man, Richard, found a great new job in New York, so they were moving. Dad was quite upset, but he got over it soon enough. 3 weeks later, a for sale sign went up on the neighbor's lawn. Mom was actually looking forward to new neighbors, but her excitement was quickly doused. From the first look, she felt uneasy. They always had a smile, but it was a stiff smile. Their faces were paler than sheets, like they'd never been in the sun. Your mom wasn't wrong at all. They didn't quite look like regular people. I couldn't put my finger on it. That said, my parents didn't abandon etiquette. After the new neighbors settled in, Mom baked some cookies and went over with Dad to welcome them. The couple came out side by side to answer the door. Their faces were still pale, and they looked tired, but their thin lips were pressed into a smile that didn't change at all. "Thank you. Come in, sir and madam. We like you very much. Feel free to come over anytime." They stayed there for an hour, but the two families didn't say much. My parents tried to make conversation. They asked where they used to live, what they did for work, but they were vague and didn't give clear answers. They didn't start conversations either. They just sat side by side on the sofa. Even when my parents said they were leaving, they still sat there side by side. At least see us to the door, I thought. But they didn't even budge. That was really strange. Andrew, listen on. This weirdness was just the surface. What happened in the following weeks was truly bizarre and terrifying. We're ready to tell you everything. You need to be mentally prepared. I should have left immediately. 3 days after the new neighbors moved in, things started to get strange. They hadn't even unpacked their luggage when they started painting the exterior. Cream with blue stripes, just like our house. Exactly the same as my parents' house. In the morning, my parents left for work, and by the afternoon, they returned to see an identical house next door. But they didn't say much about it. The next day, Dad went out to mow the lawn. The man next door came out to mow too, wearing the same hat as Dad, and using the same brand and model lawn mower. That made us a bit uncomfortable, so I wanted to mention it to him, but not too directly. Just hinted that such a coincidence was unlikely, especially since the day before, they'd painted their house to look just like ours. But when he heard it, he just kept smiling that same smile, not saying a word. Both your mom and I found it strange, so we started watching them closely for a few weeks. Unexpectedly, a week after painting their walls, the new neighbors bought a car, a 1987 BMW 3 Series convertible, red. You can probably guess that it was just like my parents' car. This was the last straw. The next day, Dad decided to go ask them. I was curious to see what they'd say too. So my parents went over to the neighbor's house. Just like last time, they came to the door side by side. Their smiles were even wider than before. "Welcome back, sir and madam. Come in." My parents walked in and sat down with them. "We just want to know why you're copying us. We don't want to make trouble, but this is no longer normal. Don't you think so?" The neighbors were silent for a moment, looking at each other. "We like neighbors. We like you. Are you?" "What's wrong?" Mom grabbed Dad's leg. "James, we need to leave. Let's go now." Mom's face turned bright red, and she looked very uneasy. Sorry, we have to go. My wife isn't feeling well. They left in a hurry. Once back home, Mom immediately slammed the door. Oh God, James, may God protect us. What's wrong? Explain to me first. James. Their bedroom door was open, and I took a quick look inside. Their bedroom was exactly the same as ours. The bedspread was the same. The curtains were the same. The bedside table was the same. How do they know what our bedroom looks like? They've never been in our house. Are you serious? James, have they been in our house? Then why didn't you confront them directly? Or call the police? At the time, my parents said they were in a state of denial. They didn't want this to be happening to them, even though deep down they knew it was happening. That night before bed, Dad set up an old camcorder in the corner, pointing at the bedroom door. I had to find out what was going on. Then, Dad pulled out an old box of tapes and took one out, putting it into the camcorder. Look at this. He fast-forwarded the tape by about an hour. I stared at the screen, utterly stunned. There they were, those strange neighbors, standing side by my parents' bed. There was no smile on their faces. They looked fierce, with faces contorted in anger. The tape continued to fast forward. They just stood there staring at my parents until 3 hours had passed. Then static appeared on the TV. They hadn't moved at all. The next day, when I watched the tape, I nearly had a heart attack. At first, I felt chills, and then I grew angrier. I grabbed a baseball bat and rushed to their house. No one answered. I kicked the door open and stormed inside. They were gone. Everything was stacked in the living room, packed up neatly. Their BMW was still in the garage, but they never came back. That same day, I took the tape to the police. The police searched hard for a long time, but they found nothing. The information on their house and car purchases was stolen from another couple in Arkansas. In any case, we decided to move immediately after that. Moving this far was for peace of mind. Oh my God. I don't even know what to say. I'm sorry, but so many years have passed since then. Why did you suddenly decide to tell me now? Remember how I mentioned Dad's good friend, the old neighbor? They still keep in touch from time to time. Yesterday, he called me to say a new neighbor moved in next door. On the second day, they repainted their house to look just like Richard's old house. Story 2. The well-worn boots. Oh, I took off one earphone. I said, I like your boots. He repeated, oh, thank you. I have tons of these boots, he said. I buy several pairs a year. They're perfect for work. You know. Yeah, of course, I wear these for work too. Where do you work? Turner Construction. Oh, right. You're doing that big project on East Street, aren't you? Yes, sir. That's going to be the city's largest hotel. It looks big, indeed. I used to be in construction too, a long time ago. Probably back when your mom was still learning to walk. Oh, really? Were you with a company or freelancing or ... My father was in construction, doing all the carpentry work too. I started working with him in 1962. I was only 15 back then. We built a few small houses. Of course, not as big as the ones you're building now. Did you enjoy building them? Kid, I loved it. It's like a free gym workout. Plus, there were perks. Perks? Can you keep a secret? Kid. Of course, sir. Did you ever play around at construction sites as a kid? I used to hang out at the site with friends. maybe caused a bit of mischief here and there. I did the same as a kid, with the neighbor kids, when our house was being built. The neighborhood was nearly empty. It gradually grew over time. We used to explore the houses under construction, setting up some makeshift structures. Maybe we caused a little mischief too, haha. Come on, who could resist when given the chance? Kids, right? The perks I mentioned are things you only enjoy as an adult. Listen, kid, back in the 1980s, we didn't have cell phones. You'd meet a pretty girl at a bar, hit it off immediately, and tell her you're building a new house. She'd say she wants to see it. And so you'd take her there. Just the two of you. Alone in an empty house. Ah, but isn't going back to your own place more private? Sure, it's more private, but it would leave quite a mess. Ah, hey, you don't take a girl to a construction site just to fool around. You know, for fun. You take her there for, you know, I don't know, for easy disposal, kid. You could slit her stomach, or chop off her limbs, whatever you wanted to do. And after, you just bury it under the house. Done. Your dirty clothes, everything. Seal it with cement, finish the floor, and complete the house. Where could they look for her? Then you just hand over the house as per the contract. With a jolt of the wheels, the bus came to a stop. It was my stop. He stood up, patted my shoulder. I took a few steps back. He got off the bus. A memory flashed in my mind. I was not yet 6 years old then. Playing hide and seek with my friends, I hid in the crawl space under a house. In the dirt beside me, there was half a boot sticking out, the exact same boots I was wearing, the same as the boots I'd found under the crawl space of every house in the neighborhood. Exactly the same. Story 3, the weighted blanket. You might have heard of weighted blankets. Originally designed to help people with autism, anxiety, and insomnia find calm. But gradually, many households started using weighted blankets because they're genuinely comfortable. For comfort, we're willing to pay any price. Have you noticed? We single people spend almost all our money on comfort. Why are we always longing for comfort? My life isn't very comfortable. 2 years ago, my wife and kids went missing. I sold our suburban house and found a small, cheap apartment near my work. I took every therapy recommended by the police and social workers. Then I threw myself back into work. Even with the medication they gave me, I still couldn't sleep more than an hour or two each night. But it's okay. The worst is already behind me. Grief and loss eventually fade. So, I bought a weighted blanket from Amazon. It's a huge one, the size of my double bed. Even though I'm the only one sleeping under it, I'm an Amazon Prime member, so I chose today free delivery. But it took several days to arrive. After a long journey, the box was deformed. Half of it was lying on the porch, the other half in the parking space. It was tied with a string on top, looking like it had been kicked all the way here. But it arrived, after all. So I didn't file a complaint. As I dragged it into my apartment, I announced to the empty surroundings, "This thing has such a rustic charm. A gift from Grandma from the old farm." Yes, from the old family farm. But talking to myself didn't really convince me. It looked more like a makeshift bomb. Something from a movie set. Not only was the box dirty and battered, the burlap string was frayed, and there were even some burn marks on it. I took 2 hours, had 3 gin and tonics, and a hearty microwave dinner before gathering enough courage, or let's say, recklessness, to open it. The blanket was carelessly folded into squares, tied up with the same type of rope as the outside. The packaging was really unimpressive, but the blanket itself looked decent. It was a plush, blue microfiber. The stitching was tight, and the weight felt just right. There was no unusual smell. But you know, blankets always have a hint of that. Chemical scent when new. I wasn't sure if it was machine washable. I tried to find a wash tag, but it was too faded to read. It seemed risky to just throw it in the washing machine. So I tossed it on my duvet and went about my business. Around midnight, I decided to give it a try. It couldn't get dirtier, right? I'd spent hundreds over the past few months on the latest adjustable memory foam mattress, thousands on high-quality cotton sheets, custom pillows, and none of it had helped me sleep. Honestly, I didn't have high hopes for this blanket. I was just pretending to be excited. I slid under the cold sheets, pulled the blanket over me. The blanket wasn't entirely smooth, but I'd read in the reviews that this was due to long-distance shipping. After a few days, it would flatten out. The wait, as they say, is the magic. Surprisingly, I felt it. Comfort. I closed my eyes, imagining my two youngest kids climbing into bed and lying next to me, holding back their giggles so they wouldn't wake me. The part of the blanket resting behind me felt just like my wife's familiar body. When I opened my eyes again, it was 10 in the morning. I was already late for work. I had never felt so thrilled to write a review so genuinely. However, that strange chemical smell became more pronounced. I could even smell it on my skin. It remained even after a shower. By the end of the month, I couldn't tolerate it anymore. I took the blanket to a dry cleaner. I was ready for the older woman at the counter to judge the smell, and had even prepared some excuses. Work has been too busy. I forgot the blanket in my car. I had Indian food for lunch on Friday and left the leftovers in the car all weekend long. The smell in the car was but I didn't get the chance to tell my story. She simply ran a metal detector over the blanket and said the filling was off. She couldn't clean it. Try a dry cleaning spray. You can get it on Amazon. I couldn't imagine what could be wrong with the filling, so I asked. The clumps from shipping hadn't even loosened yet, but the product page said it was polypropylene filling. All the reviews recommended dry cleaning. There's metal, she said, pushing me and my smelly blanket out the door. I enjoyed another month of comfortable sleep, but I couldn't bear the smell anymore. My coworkers started to complain too, and my manager suggested I check my washer to see if a rat had crawled in and died. That's right, I had reached my limit. I decided I'd go home and throw the blanket away, buy a new one. But, you know, when you've lost everything in your world and see no way out, you become stubborn. You hoard everything that brings you comfort because you can't lose those small comforts. So, I went to 6 more laundromats until finally, I stopped the owner and asked for an explanation. They use glass beads in the filling, and sometimes during manufacturing, metal screws or shavings might get mixed in. You know, factory machinery and all. Right, so you just cut a small opening along the seam, pour the beads out into a bucket or a bathtub or something, then put the blanket in the washing machine and hang it up to dry. Afterward, just pour the beads back in and sew it up. I told him I don't know how to sew. You can buy a funnel on Amazon for a few bucks. He shrugged with a cold indifference, then turned back to stare at a pile of dirty underwear. So I did as he suggested. The funnel arrived a week later. It was quite a hassle. Armed with the funnel and a bucket, I pulled the blanket to the edge of my bed, made a small cut at one corner of the seam, then positioned the opening over the bucket, ready to catch the cascade of beads pouring out. But all I heard was a single clink, the sound of metal hitting plastic. I looked down and saw a metal ring, a wedding ring engraved with a fingerprint. There was also an inscription inside, but it was obscured because the ring was still on a piece of bone. But I knew what it said. To my beloved, in eternal glory. The fingerprint on the ring was mine. My mind went blank, my body numb. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulling more of the blanket off in a panic. More filling tumbled out. It wasn't a flood. It was more like a trickle. The blanket seemed to be vomiting, spewing out dry, brittle pieces of bone and flesh. Like a cyst being squeezed, a thick chunk burst into the bucket. I caught a glint of something silver. My son inherited his mother's gum disease. That was his dental filling. On a tiny knuckle, there was a faded Hello Kitty Band-Aid. My daughter had scraped her finger while knocking on her brother's door. She smiled through her tears as I put on that cute Band-Aid. Her tear-filled eyes lit up with a smile. For 2 months, I'd been sleeping under the weight of my wife and children. Compressed into thousands of fragments, the police did their best, but they couldn't trace the source of the package. The apartment building's cameras showed a brown van with no license plates. Tossing it out the window at my doorstep, there were no clues worth following. Amazon's lawyers provided evidence, proving that they had shipped a brand new, high-quality blanket. They asked me to be fair with them and immediately issued me a refund. They even offered a gift voucher for future purchases. But I'll never buy from them again. I threw out the Amazon Smart Assistant. That was the first thing I got rid of. Then all the new bedding I canceled my membership to. After some thought, I got rid of my smartphone and smartwatch as well. I know Amazon and smart tech are convenient and helpful, but I never want to go through something like that again. After all, it's the only reasonable explanation. Otherwise, how could they have found the bodies? That's the end of today's story. If you have nightmares, don't worry. I'll come and eat them for you. This is the stories from us for today. See you in our dreams.